This is KTN News.
Welcome back. You're watching a KTN News special with me, Abby Agina, as we focus on our Kenya debt crisis. And just before we went for that commercial break, we had the views of Kenyans regarding our debt situation in the country. And at this point in time, I'd like to bring in Mr. Muraguri to just weigh in terms of what are the options. Is debt relief an option for the country, considering the economic growth has been improving over the last couple of years?
Thanks, Abby. So when we think about debt relief for Kenya, we must ask ourselves, the country, is, timely to ask for debt relief, and we should get, we should pursue the options of debt relief. And when we think about debt relief, also, we need to ask ourselves what options there exist and where would we take, that window given for debt relief. And certainly when we talk about debt relief, we are not saying that the country then, you are told you owed me 100,000 shillings, 1 billion, 2 trillion, now don't pay. They're saying debt relief, it's a moratorium. You get a moratorium of not paying for a certain time of point so that you can respond to the shocks. Right now, when we think about, debt relief, because really the crisis we are talking about very soon, with the Kenya shillings tinkering and failing, and we knowing that, of almost, probably 60% of our debt is dollar denominated, and the Kenya shilling is doing badly against the dollar. So if you think about it from that perspective, then clearly you can tell, if we got an opportunity, for debt relief as a country, then we would have, to push that expenditure on poor growth. Where would we take, if you're not paying, we have 651 billion, for example, Kenya shillings to spend, or to a trillion this year. If we got a window of opportunity and do not pay that amount this year, then where would we take that, that money? That's a question, when it comes to debt relief, because we are pursuing debt relief, and based on the contract standards, which we are not, as citizens, we are not aware what the contract documents contain. Probably the government, while we may pursue, as citizens' demand for debt relief and our voice to be heard, the government might not be keen on pursuing the same, because probably the contracts demand that if you pursue debt relief, then we'll have constituted you as having defaulted on the loan obligation. And that means the interest rates, would go up for debt relief. But it's an ideal moment for Kenya to pursue a strong conversation on debt relief so that we can forward those resources to delivering services during this COVID crisis, and also taking into consideration that, our revenue and our growth for 2020, 2021 is not rosy. It's something for us to get, worried about. Thank you.
And still staying with you, of course, we've seen other African countries take on debt relief, such as Ghana. And for Kenya, what has been the stumbling block? Because on one hand, the relief gives us headroom to play around with resources in another fashion, as you've said. But on the other hand, we are simply elongating the repayment period.
I think Kenya, the stumbling block for Kenya mainly is the contractual obligations with the commercial lenders. Because the commercial lenders are in business of selling money to Kenya, and Kenya has been willingly, taking that money. So you cannot, they need to be in business. So asking for debt relief means that, there must be a cost to their money being held by Kenya. And this, for example, it's the three top, probably 10 banks in Kenya, for example, as lenders. Domestic debt in Kenya is approximately 3 trillion, let's say 3.1 trillion up to August 2020. So if you are talking, we need to pay internal interest only. It's around 315 billion. And this 315 billion, we are telling these lenders, if it's, for example, if it's domestic, we are telling them, give us the relief. So it means that our banks, which make a lot of profit on our taxes, for example, will not make money this year. So essentially, they will have felt that there is a breach on that. For external lenders, interest alone, external interest is around 100 billion, 120 billion on interest alone. If you put up the principal, then that moves, pretty high to approximately 500 billion or thereabout. So again, we are saying that we are asking that we do not pay this money. So there's an opportunity cost on those lenders. And to a greater extent is the commercial lender, like, the Exim Bank for China, for example, even if it's a Chinese-owned bank, it's a commercial bank in the first place, owned by the government to make money on behalf of the Chinese people. So negotiating with them, and of course, for example, the Eurobond, take the Eurobond, which we are, falling, due payment, and it's the interest rates are at the range of 6-7%. If you're asking that 6-7% of 300 billion or thereabout is not paid, then those people, there's an opportunity cost for the owners of the money, and they will consider that as a breach of contract. So while you can negotiate for a relief with, bilaterally with other countries and the World Bank and the rest, for commercial lenders, there is a significant, interest on them on not providing that.
Right. And let me bring in Mr. Wanyama to also just chip in on this. Of course, other pundits hold that some of the options we have as a country is to, of course, consider fiscal consolidation. How can this be achieved at the same time maintain public sector growth?
Well, I think in terms of fiscal consolidation, the idea is to reduce debt and try and manage our public finance management. In this regard, you see that there are plans, for instance, to manage the wage bill, centralize government procurement, and put in public instruments that manage the kinds of investments that we are making. So whether that is in how we'll be spending the money. So that is the plan that's there. And it's supposed to kind of guide the process of how to manage our finances. However, one example in this COVID time, and this is at least something quite different from our neighboring countries, is that we could immediately put in some tax reliefs. And in this sense, then you see, for instance, the reduction of rates. So for instance, VAT moves from 16% to 14%, turnover tax for small and medium enterprises shifts from 3% to 1%, and corporate taxation from 30% to 25%. But these are measures that, if you think of the context of the country, just holding things together, because we are in an environment of serious fiscal indiscipline. And so essentially, if we now think of the measures in place in relation to the corruption and the mismanagement and waste, then it becomes a very serious struggle. And this struggle is then not taken up by the government. The government sees ways to kind of shift this to the mwananchi. This is why, for me, it does not surprise me at all when you hear the sentiments of mwananchi when he talks about debt. And the pressure is quite clear to them. Why? Because they understand why they pay their taxes. They understand that this is their contribution to guarantee the rights that they fight for and take part in through political processes and so forth. When I think about this, I also have to say that it becomes very difficult when you think of the fact that a lot of the issues that have resulted in the debt are the fact that we have been financing over ambitious political promises. The question is, and the question a responsible policy process should be coming up is, how do we fund political promises responsibly? However, unfortunately, the political culture is one that there is a blank check from government. And government has all these means to acquire money in all its forms with no serious consideration of the consequences. In that case, then I then just go back to what my colleague Irene had said about the dips in revenue. Essentially, you will find that we are in a situation where we are now creating a system which I could describe very simply as, in order to continue surviving in this context, the big companies will avoid taxes, the mid-level companies will evade taxes, and because of this situation, then the small mwananchi will just die of taxes, because these will all be offloaded onto him. And it seems there has to be someone to come and save them. Even if they try to say as much as possible how the burden is on them, it is not convincing enough to the policymaker, because they are so estranged as to how painful the debt is affecting people. To wake up one morning and to find that the milk that was maybe 45 shillings is 70 shillings is very strainful to many of the citizens. Or that the bread that you've been relying on has just moved from 50 shillings to 70 on any given day is completely strenuous. And so policymakers really need to be aware of how these injustices are beginning to manifest and making the public very, very angry with some of the decisions they are taking in.
All right.
They're taking up.
Interesting. And let me bring in Madam Wanjiru Gikonyo. Well, the president is on record of course, indicating that we need to take austerity measures as a country. He did take a pay cut, including the large executive. And on the flip side of all this, as much as we are pushing for fiscal consolidation, avoiding wastage, taming the wage bill, do we have the political will that is alive to actually help this machinery roll smoothly?
Abi, thank you. And even in the way you asked the question, that is the point. Because government has been talking about austerity, they are calling it fiscal consolidation. It's a better term. They fear if you talk about about austerity, it sounds like government expenditure is being cut, and so it will affect the economic situation. But in reality, as James has laid out, as the panelists have laid out, the consolidation or austerity is a long time coming. Now, the measures that the president talks about are an age-old issue. Even when the president was finance minister, if you remember that big drama around the Passats that were bought, because the fuel guzzlers we had to end the era of fuel guzzlers. So the issue of responsible spending by government, cutting out the waste, cutting out the seepages, is an age-old question. And I think Irene talked about the lack of fiscal discipline. So that is a problem. Government is saying there's also parastatals that are huge guzzlers, actually are huge conduits of corruption. And in fact, some of the recent scandals have been through these parastatals. And the president has the Presidential Task Force report on reform of the parastatals sitting on his desk since 2014 that has not been implemented. So no, I don't believe the political will is there. As a coalition, we are saying we have a problem of political will, but of course we want to engage with the hope that if we engage citizens, we can bring that political will to bear. So I think as citizens, Kenyans are very unhappy with their political leadership. As you can see, 85% know there is a problem. But I think there is a sense of helplessness where we feel, what do we do? So as a coalition, we are saying we need, yes, government is negotiating around relief with various organizations. And in fact, what the Ghanas and everybody are doing is they want to change the paradigm, talk to the commercial lenders, maybe get the, IMF and such to stand in the gap to enable this relief process. So they're really trying to push the dialogue. But that should not detract from the fact that the borrowing by many of these African countries was not responsible. And a lot of these countries were in trouble. I mean, Zambia was in trouble, Ethiopia was in trouble, Kenya was in trouble before COVID. But the point is, much as the government has on paper these processes, where is the stakeholder? Where is the accountability? How do we ensure, like James was saying, like Irene has said, like Lawrence has said, that if we do get relief, or when we borrow additionally, where is that money going? It needs to go towards the sectors that grow. For instance, agriculture employs the largest number of people in this country. It's also the largest contributor to one of the largest contributors to the GDP. Actually, as a sector, it is the most significant. But if you look at the investments in agriculture, it's like 3%, and 20% is going into infrastructure projects. And we've already said that those projects are overpriced and they're not economically viable, some of them. We're not saying all. So the conversation we need to have is about fiscal responsibility and political accountability, and saying beyond the numbers, Kenyans have been betrayed and government has defaulted on us, and we need to get back into that space and change this conversation.
All right.
So that's what we are trying to do. Yes.
All right. And Irene, Madam Irene, I'd like you to take us home. Do you feel the Parliament has done enough in mitigating the debt crisis we are facing as a country? And what really does the road ahead look like?
Sad that I should be the bearer of bad news, but I think we all know this. And I'd just like to give us one example, and this is particularly with the medical equipment supplies. This was the scheme for the equipment that was supposed to go to the county. So if Senate itself, as the upper house, says that they did not have documents and contracts for such an obligation that they, as representatives of county, would have to bear, then it already shows the kind of problem that we have. So if our parliament, that includes both National Assembly and Senate, are grappling with lack of documents that they should then oversight, it means we have a big problem. So I would, my immediate response to that is that Parliament has terribly failed, because it does have expansive powers to demand from the executive that information be given to them. Because otherwise, what are you oversighting? You must oversight based on information. So if contracts of such magnitude are missing from an oversight institution, how much more for CSOs and the citizens who should fund that system? So for me, that is a problem that Senate, whether it's at intergovernmental relations, must address, because otherwise they serve no purpose and are the representatives of the people.
All right, Irene, you have less than 30 seconds. We need to wrap it up.
Okay. Lastly is, I think, the disconnect that Senate does not see the debt as a concern to them. I think Senate must start looking as debt actually reduces the equitable share that should go to counties who they represent. So in this conversation, we expect more action from Senate, because it eventually means that services at lower levels, which at county, is greatly impacted by debt. So I'll rest my case there and say that the Parliament of Kenya has a lot of pulling up of their socks, and it should not be CSOs at the forefront of this conversation. We must see more action, and we will definitely support when we see them moving this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much to my panelists. We've been speaking there to my four panelists, very ably trying to address this very important matter that continues to face the country, the debt crisis. Well, that is a KTN News Special. Thank you for your valid company. Thank you for your feedback. So far, the polls are still standing at 85% saying no, our debt is no longer sustainable. 14% of you are saying it is sustainable. And we encourage you to keep the conversation going on our social media platforms as we continue to interact. And thank you one more time for those that made this broadcast a success. My name is Abi Agina. See you next time. Have a lovely evening.
This is KTN News.
We value your feedback and welcome any comments, queries, or complaints regarding our news content. You can get